We find it to be much more enjoyable and I think important to listen to the community voices.
Sure.
Community-driven news and analysis. Startups in Minneapolis and Eden Prairie.
Community, there's just news that nobody else is going to cover.
And a robust elder in Egan.
With public access television, it's such a wonderful opportunity to not only contribute something to your community, but to do some education.
Now on Democratic Visions. Here's producer Jeff Strate.
You know, we citizen producers get to use this BCAT studio in Bloomington. There are, of course, other access studios in the metro region. They exist to help regular folks amplify their causes, their arts, their music, their books, their recipes, and their politics. Access to Democracy does that quite nicely. It's a talk show produced at Egan TV. Its founding co-producer and host is Alan Miller. Alan Miller and his wife Sharon have been producing a public access show called Access to Democracy, and it's been going on for more than 20 years. So why don't you give me a precise number?
23 years.
23 years.
Half-hour interview show. It's done over 2,300 half-hour interviews, and we've done a bunch of specials as well.
It's an amazing run. I've been doing access television now for about 12 years here, and have come to believe that we need more of it.
Well, there are two things. Number one, newspapers are drying up, so you have to rely on your weekly newspapers, and television gives people 10-second sound bites for most of the big stations, and the only way people are going to get to know who's in their community and something about them is through local access television. But it just seems to be growing.
Alan, I want to read something a friend of yours wrote about you. It was actually the Star Tribune. They said, of your show, their wide-ranging discussions look on a depth and nuance hard to find in an era where politicians tend to speak in sound bites and our leaders, including the president, that was Donald Trump back then, communicate in mere characters. His interviews give viewers a sense not only of what the guests do and where they stand, but also who they are as people. That's pretty good.
That is very, very nice.
That comes across clear as day every time I view your show.
You read it just as I wrote it. No, not really.
So how did you get started with the show anyway? Is the rumor true that Tim Pawlenty may have been your first guest?
Tim Pawlenty, what happened is...
The former governor. Right?
I was on the Burnsville-Egan Telecommunications Commission.
Sure.
Years ago. I haven't been on it in years. It doesn't even exist anymore because Burnsville and Egan are separate entities now. Somebody had lined up Tim for an interview, and when he was just a legislator, and then pulled out at the last minute, and they said, we don't have anybody to do it. Alan, will you do it? Well, I had done quite a bit of television back east.
Where?
On Channel 11 in New York with Joe Franklin.
Joe Franklin?
Joe
Franklin?
The Joe Franklin,
okay.
The original talk show host.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I stepped in a day in advance to interview Tim Pawlenty. And we conducted a half-hour interview. And afterwards, I asked Sharon, my wife, how'd I do? Because I was pretty nervous. It's the first time I had done something.
You were no Joe Franklin, though, right?
And I was better on Joe's show,
okay.
But it was a little different. Here I was the host, so she said you had about as much personality as a shirt cardboard. So I'm very competitive.
Sure.
So I was determined I would do better, and this thing just grew from that into this weekly or semi-weekly talk show where we did 3 interviews a week, generally on a Friday, and still do. And it's like Topsy, it just growed.
Before we get on further with Access to Democracy, I got to say something about Joe Franklin. I was never a regular on their show, but I did make 3 appearances with Joe. and he invited me to be a guest host.
Is everybody happy?
That never happened. But
No.
Anyway.
He was the most eccentric guy in the world, and
But that's the kind of eccentricity I like.
but it was nice. It was nice,
you're
and
right.
for his 40th anniversary, people were writing stories about Joe.
Yeah.
And so I wrote one for Newsday. I was writing for Newsday sometimes.
That's the Long
At the-
Island newspaper.
Yeah, right. And Joe contacted me afterwards, and he said, you know, everybody distorted this thing, but you told it like it is. I am eccentric. I do have a messy office,
Yeah.
and I'd like you to come on my show. And that started a series of appearances on Joe's shows. I would drive to Secaucus on a Friday.
WWOR-TV.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he said, bring several shirts, ties, and jackets. And after each show, you would change as though it was a different day. And he would give you a different persona on each show. I might be a book reviewer, I might be a lawyer, I might be a journalist. I sat next to a wrestler. I sat next to a snake charmer. I mean, you never knew who the other guests were going to be with you. And it was a lot of fun, and I did quite a bit of that with Joe.
I spent one really great evening with him. He also did WOR radio.
Yes.
And he said, hey, I want you to stop by the radio studio Friday night. I said, well, what's going on? It was rather late, like 10 o'clock at night. And he said, Steve Allen and I are going to be on the show together. I said, the Steve Allen? He said, yeah. So I went. And what I learned about Joe, a very smart man. He knows how to carry on an intelligent conversation.
Very smart.
He and Mr. Allen, just magic. I'll never forget that night.
Eccentric, smart, and a lot of fun.
A lot of fun, and good-natured too.
Yes, he
Always
was.
good-natured. Now, back to the Twin Cities, back to Minnesota, back to cable access television. You've been doing this for a long time. We need to have more shows like yours. I know you're kind of becoming semi-active only.
I'm sort of stepping down,
Sort of.
Steve Francisco is going to step in with Sharon, who co-produces with me.
Yeah.
And they're going to take on the heavy work. I'm busy trying to write something that I've been struggling with for 10 years. So, and Steve is a super interviewer.
He's very good. I hear he's out of the country right now.
He should be arriving in Warsaw today.
What's he doing in Poland?
He's going to do humanitarian relief work for the people who are refugees from the Ukraine. And he's over there for about 10 days.
Okay.
And can't say enough about that.
Well, these are the kind of people you have hosting your show when you're not available.
We have a lot of good guest hosts.
How did you get in contact with them?
Some of them were guests who I ultimately asked to host a show. Some have been on many shows. Like, I'm very fortunate. Former Supreme Court Justice Paul Anderson has been a frequent guest. We talk about constitutional law. We talk about so many aspects of the law and society. And I asked him, will you host a show? Well, he's hosted a show that had a former senator and a former governor on it, and Jim Carlson, Senator Jim Carlson, has been a regular on the show. I've had a lot of people. As a matter of fact, I was just scheduled with Pat Anderson, who was the mayor of Eagan, and she went on to become a Republican state committee woman.
Yeah, I remember.
And she's been very active in Republican politics, and she's even running for office this year.
What office is she running?
For the legislature,
Oh, really?
again,
Okay.
much to my surprise.
Yeah.
And Pat and I lock horns, and we've had some great interviews, and really I have a great affection for her.
Well, let's say there are startup groups in the metro area who want to do something like what you're doing. You've written a book about this. How long ago?
I wrote this 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
And it was back in the days of tape. I even set out some of our bad experiences with tape and our old studio. We now have a state-of-the-art studio in the Thomson Reuters building in Eagan, and it's a wonderful facility. It's similar to this, and it's a whole different ballgame. But back in those days,
What do beginners need to know about what they're getting into?
number one, not to get discouraged. Number two, to strive to get better with every interview. Number three, you really got to persevere. You start out and you ask somebody for an interview and they will say, you know, who are you? Why do I want to come on your show? And then you explain to them that I want to offer something to the community that it can't get otherwise, and see a half hour of you to really learn what you're all about, what you stand for, who you happen to be. I mean, we've had doctors, we've had lawyers, we had an Indian chief. We literally have run the gamut of people, a lot of politicians, and a lot of just community people, restaurant owners, things like that.
In the summer.
These are folks who don't get paid much attention to by the local community newspapers or by the regional media at all.
Well, some of them do, some of them
but,
don't.
But even if they do, you're giving them a full half hour so folks can learn about them. Folks can get their side of the story, a business or politician, whatever it happens to be. And that is really missing in this world of tweets and Facebook hits and all this sort of stuff. That's why I encourage everyone, hey, come on, try a show, do a show. Make it simple to begin with. But like you said, be ready.
You know, you'll be nervous in the beginning,
Yeah.
but the fact of the matter is, with public access television, it's such a wonderful opportunity to not only contribute something to your community, but to do some education as well. And yes, you have to do research, and yes, you have to be well prepared for your interview, and yes, you have to be ready to jump in if you have a guest who freezes up and gives you one-syllable answers. But, you know, the payoff, and certainly it's not in money. It has been very expensive over the years to maintain this show, but the payoff is that you really are contributing something to your community.
Absolutely. And the one thing I point out to people is you're not spending a year or two to raise $30,000 for a single show. These facilities are free because of a federal law that was passed in the 1980s. So you can come in with very little money and do a show. There's a lot of sweat equity you're talking about here. Though.
Yeah.
A lot of
You
sweat
know,
equity.
Things like you want to give shirts like this to the crew, to give them at least something to show for. We have cups for the guests, which have the name of the show on them. We did a special run of cups for our 20th anniversary show, for which we got a lot of publicity.
You have sponsors of the show, and they're billboarded at the beginning of the show, and to a lesser degree during the closing credits.
Yeah, to the closing credits, it's just thank you for being.
Yeah,
you know,
do they help, so like buy cups and say, you know?
That's where the money goes.
That's where the money goes.
There's a little bit of obviously we have a webmaster because we have a website,
Yeah.
and he gets he does a wonderful job, gets a good piece of the sponsorships are so inexpensive for our show. It amounts to nothing. It pays for the bureaucratic costs of maintaining the website and things like that.
Now, you're on more than 30 channels, correct?
We are in 35 cities in Minnesota,
Okay.
plus a YouTube and our own website.
How'd you get connected to all those cities?
I have no idea.
You have no idea. It just happened?
They found out about us in some cases and asked for us. And we have some very sharp communications people in Eagan, and they let it be known that our programs are available. We don't stand on our copyright or anything like that.
Sure.
And most stations struggle to have content So we've been very lucky in Egan that we have really good content, but they picked up on it, and it's sent electronically. Now, when it comes to electronics, I have no idea how that's accomplished.
I think that's the best course to take on that.
Yeah. We also have our own website, and we're also on YouTube, so that we're seen around the world. I mean, I even got a call from Germany not too long ago from somebody who had seen a program. So you never know who's watching.
Alan, thanks so much for being here.
It's been a pleasure.
Visit accesstodemocracy.com on the web for videos, a station list, and more info.
All three?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I see.
Closure of community newspapers in Minnesota and the emergence of new hyper-local digital newsrooms is an ongoing story. When Southwest Journal in Minneapolis shut down in late 2020, Southwest Connector and Southwest Voices sprouted in what had become a local news desert. Editor Melody Hoffman met with Jeff about Southwest Voices.
Melody Hoffman is the first editor of Southwest Voices, a new news source in Southwest Minneapolis, but it's just not Linden Hills, is it?
No, I think there's a misperception that when we say Southwest Minneapolis, it's just that bottom quadrant of Southwest Minneapolis. But Southwest Minneapolis is actually goes all the way up north to Stevens Square, goes all the way east to 35W, and then down to like the Linden Hills area. But it includes Whittier and Uptown, my neighborhood of East Harriet. Yeah, so it's a pretty big portion of Minneapolis.
So how do you cover that? Volunteers or what?
Well, right now it is. I do a lot as the editor. I produce some of the content, but I also work with some wonderful freelancers that work on specific topics. So we have a reporter, Melissa Whitler, who focuses just on the schools, the Minneapolis public schools, and she covers that. Charlie and I both love to talk.
And that's Charlie Ryback.
Sorry, yes, the Charlie Ryback that everybody loves and adores. Super sweet person, new in my life, but we like to cover local small businesses and kind of talk about what makes them unique to the neighborhoods that we cover. Mm-hmm. So it's actually a really small team right now. We're hoping to grow, but we just launched in October of last year, so we're like a baby right now.
So are you on social media? You have a website too.
Oh yeah, so one unique thing about Southwest Voices is that we are digital only right now. So we send out a daily newsletter to our subscribers where we kind of let people know what we've been covering. So we'll link to articles that we've written that we've posted on the website. But also we collect links from other news sources, which is something I really like. So we're very community driven in that way, in that we support other local news organizations.
Okay.
We also, in our newsletter, talk about what you can do at night, after you're done working or on the weekend. But we put all of our news stories up on our website, and then we also have social media. So Facebook and Twitter are our big ones. We're not on TikTok yet. Still haven't found a way.
How do you get the word out to people?
Oh, that's a great question. If you
Yeah, we're aware of that. I'm with the Eden Prairie Local News, another startup newspaper for Eden Prairie.
Right, and isn't it interesting that
Yeah.
that is one of the big things that you're always working on, is letting people know that you exist. One thing that we do is we're doing neighborhood listening tours, and so we've done one already in Stevens Square and Whittier. We're kind of working our way down south.
Is that a virtual?
No, this is in person.
In person?
Yeah, where we go to the individual neighborhoods and we visit local businesses, hang out at a coffee shop, and we just talk to people that way. But also with the power of social media, if we put out a story on Facebook, it's amazing to see it, because you can see all this behind the scenes, how the story kind of travels through different venues in Facebook, and then we have a bunch of people reading our stories, just kind of through the magic of the internet. So the internet is obviously a huge tool for us, but we also like to be in person in these neighborhoods, and letting people know that we exist that way too.
Interesting. Now, I've noticed once a week you have something called Perspectives.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a newsletter. And
Yeah.
you're dealing with the plans to renovate Hennepin Avenue, south of Lake Street down to Douglas. What's the purpose of that? How do you do it? And,
Our Voices of Southwest, sometimes what we call them, but also the Perspectives pages, is at the core of our mission, which is really to uplift the community voices. So we're not very much interested in cultivating opinions. Like, me and Charlie don't sit there and like talk about what our opinions are and then share them with everybody.
Oh, sure you do. No.
No,
Oh, you don't.
if we
Okay.
could, but
Yeah.
we find it to be much more enjoyable and I think important to listen to the community voices.
Sure.
And so what we do with these big issues, like redoing a major street in Minneapolis, which, you know, in Eden Prairie, you might think like, well, what's the big deal? In the city, it's a huge deal because it's
Sure.
including buses and bike lanes and all sorts of things. And it's making a lot of people have very strong opinions about it. So when stuff like that happens, we go, okay, let's create a space on our website where people can submit their thoughts. And you can do it like on our website, or people can text us or email us. And then we publish all of them. Like, we don't censor anybody's thoughts. We just like anybody's perspectives on something like Hennepin Avenue or public schools we like to share. And then that's also a resource to share with other people in terms of like, what is the community thinking about this topic?
Sure. Does the city or the school district, are they in tune to the perspectives service that you're doing?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's unclear how much the like administration of the city and the public schools are tuning in, but we know that community members, parents, families, that they definitely come to us as a source, especially for education news and transportation news as well. But really our job is just to get the information out and the opinions out and just letting people know, especially if there's actions for people to take. So if there's a school board meeting that's really important, or a public meeting about Hennepin Avenue, we really push that, and we tell people over and over when these meetings are and how you can join, because we think that's really important too.
Now, I was fascinated by the fact that you don't have subscribers, or at least you don't refer to them as subscribers. They're members.
Yeah.
And probably like Minnesota Public Radio.
Exactly.
Explain how that's working.
Yeah, well, fun fact, Andrew, one of the other co-founders of, Andrew Haig, one of the co-founders of Southwest Voices, he comes from the public radio world.
Okay.
This is a fun fact. But, you know, the structure around having members is that just like public radio or PBS, you can be a member and donate money to keep it running, but that doesn't mean that somebody who isn't donating can't access the same information,
Okay.
right? So we don't have paywalls.
Yeah.
We want to keep all of the information free. The newsletter that people subscribe to, so they could technically be seen as subscribers, we actually post that newsletter on our website, so there's no barrier to that information either.
So it's open to everybody, no walls or anything.
No, that's important for us.
Unlike PBS stations right now that have a paywall, if you want to see programs from the past, they do have that right now.
Yeah, we're not interested right now in doing anything like that, because what's most important for us is that we share community news with the community. So.
Now you're filling a news gap that was created by the downfall of, I believe, the Southwest Journal, correct? Yeah. And do you talk with those people, or have you sought counsel from them about what works and what doesn't?
In my capacity, I have not checked in with
Okay.
Southwest Journal, but we have a lot of readers that used to subscribe to Southwest Journal now supporting us, which is great. And one thing that we've really brought over from the energy of Southwest Journal is their dedication to covering small businesses.
Yeah.
So that's something that the community always wants, is like, for example, there's a malt shop on 50th and Bryant, and it's under construction, and multiple people emailed us and they're like, what's going on with the malt shop? Like, is it going away? This is really, we love this place. So I have a freelance reporter now looking into how long is the construction going to take? When are they going to reopen, right? So, and that's something that the Southwest Journal did very well. And sometimes when I'm even doing research on these small local businesses, I'll see old articles from Southwest Journal pop up about them.
Yeah.
So that is definitely something we took over from them. But we're not in cahoots with them, you know, for better or worse.
Sure.
Yeah.
You're enjoying your stint as an editor right
Absolutely.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
What's the best part of it?
Every day is something different.
Okay.
Every day I get to meet new people. Every day I get to talk to new people. I also love to learn. So like, I'm constantly learning new things about my city that I love so much. Where I have been living in Minneapolis since 2009, and I've always been kind of like an engaged citizen, right? But my work took me outside of the city, and so it's really nice now that I live in the area that I cover. And anytime I go outside and start, meeting people or talking to people, that could be a story, and I think that's just a really cool way to do my job.
When you go out and meet people, do you have business cards or anything to hand out?
I
brochures?
do now officially have business cards.
Really?
I also do it. Yes, you can have one if you'd like.
I'll trade you mine for yours.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm now in the business card trading business.
Okay.
I also have a press pass, which I think is important. With press pass is just letting people know, like when you're out and about, that you are covering something.
right.
Especially now that a lot of journalism is done on phones. It's like, are you a citizen covering it, or are you a journalist, right?
yeah.
So I like to note that I'm doing something for my work, but I definitely share it that way. But I also love to wear our merch, like I'm wearing my T-shirt, like just kind of getting the logo and the vibe of us out in the city. Yeah.
As editor, what do you feel is the biggest challenge for Southwest Voices over the next 5 years?
That's a question.
It's hard to answer. It's hypothetical, but
Yeah, I think one challenge we are going to have is to circle back to what I said earlier about the misperception about what Southwest Minneapolis is.
Right, yeah.
And so a lot of people will say, oh, well, that's not for me because I don't live in Linden Hills.
Yeah.
When I think about when I'm writing my articles or talking to a freelance person that I'm working with, I'm always thinking about the renters in Whittier or the small business owner that's on Lindale selling coffee, right? Those are the people I think of.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas other people have a misperception that we're just covering, the richer, wider area of Southwest Minneapolis, when that's not the case. So I think, busting through that misconception or perception is going to be a challenge for us. And I think as somebody who's worked in local news, community news for a long time, it's letting people know that we exist. It's just spreading the word.
Melody, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. This is so great.
Say Southwest Minneapolis. Get in touch with Southwest Voices at southwestvoices.news. Eden Prairie Local News is a nonprofit suburban news startup. For nearly 2 years, Jeff has helped EPLN as a member of its board and as a contributor.
What is a news desert?
As COVID-19 restrictions are lifted, the online newspaper's staff and founders have been meeting folks in person, most recently at the Eden Prairie Eco Expo in early April. EPLN co-editor Jim Bayer was there.
Yeah, it's actually frightening a little bit that so many local newspapers have been lost, not only in Minnesota, but throughout the country, hundreds of them over the last several years. And the pandemic did not help that problem one bit, which made it an interesting prospect to start a new organization like Eden Prairie Local News in the midst of it. So during the first year of our operation, everything has been all virtual. And now that we're starting to come out of our offices and going out and actually meeting people and talking to people face to face again has been very good. And I think all of that is just important to the community. There's just news that nobody else is going to cover. If something big happens, then everybody's interested, but it's a lot of the little things that make a community, and that's what we are putting our efforts into covering. The key, I think, to this organization has been a very interested and motivated group of local people who were willing to expend energy on a volunteer basis and for an extended period of time until it became a viable organization. A lot of our folks are still working as volunteers. So that would be, I think, probably the biggest challenge for a startup in a community is to identify those people.
Eden Prairie Local News, Southwest Voices, Access to Democracy, and Democratic Visions are local media platforms that amplify community concerns and perspectives.
Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.
Democratic Visions is handcrafted by volunteers from Eden Prairie, Hopkins, Minnetonka, Edina, and Bloomington. Watch us on select cable systems and on our YouTube channel. This is Carol Sundstrom.